Hi, my name is Jeremy Murray, and this is my video blog reflection regarding the material we've covered in our MBA class this semester. Much like the blog itself, I'd like to keep this pretty informal. So in week one, we discussed management styles and how we like to be managed and how we like to manage others. First off, I became management, I think about 8, 9 years ago. But prior to that, I had been an occupational therapist, worked as a staff therapist in my office. And eventually I was promoted to our orthotics lab. It was a second degree, it was a little more education, but nonetheless, I ended up in our orthotics lab and kind of accidentally I ended up managing that. In a nutshell, what had happened was our previous orthotist had left unexpectedly. I was the only person who was there, and I ended up managing that lab. And it really was, I was thrust into it without really probably being ready for it. Nonetheless, as as I started as a manager, I was a department of one, and I really was only concerned about myself and my department and the health of it. So, although I was technically the manager, I didn't have to do a whole lot of managing of others. I really just had to manage myself, manage my department, make sure that that was progressing and profitable by company standards. Shortly after that, I hired another employee because I was starting to get overwhelmed. And when I hired her, then I had one more person I was responsible for. Shortly after that, I hired a third employee, and then ultimately, just about 6 months ago, I hired a fourth employee. So I've been working in this orthotics lab now that's a progressively growing orthotics lab for the last 10, 12 years now. About 2 years ago, I was moved from a management position in this little tiny department into our outpatient therapy division, which put me in a position where I was overseeing 50 employees or so. And I've done that for the last number of years. 6 months ago, when I started back at school, I reverted back to the orthotics lab. So when you read some of my stuff, sometimes you'll see that I switch back and forth between what I previously managed and what I do now. And ultimately, I'm now managing a small department again, but I used to do a larger department. And I think if you talk to people about my management styles, I think you'll see a couple different things that are pretty consistent. I think you'll see that people say that I'm relatively even keeled. I think they'll tell you that I'm professional. I think they'll tell you that I am pretty flexible and uh, pretty approachable, I think. The other side of that is I think that some of the older employees that are a little more set in their ways, I think they would probably tell you that I'm a little more abrasive and a little more difficult to get along with. And I think mostly it has to do with I like to see people who want to grow in their careers. And I like to see people evolve and take new concepts and run with them and develop themselves as professionals. And because of that, I've had some conflicts with some of the individuals that I've worked with over time who really just want to kind of show up and get a paycheck. And I don't know that people would disagree with that, but if you're that exact person who has to deal with my expectations of you growing as a person, sometimes that's tough to take. That also kind of flows into my personality. My personality, once again, I'm pretty even keeled. I don't think I get too excited. I don't take things with a lack of seriousness, but I also don't run around with my hair on fire either. When we did the Big Five personality test, the biggest thing about it that I thought was interesting was it said that I was somebody who didn't seek out new experiences, which I don't think is true whatsoever. In the last number of years, I have bought and sold 3 houses. I've had 2 children. I'm now on my third career. I've changed departments. I've changed locations. So I think I'm actually one of those people who are always pursuing new experiences. And sometimes that gets in the way a little bit because it muddles my vision of where I'd like to be in the future. When you look at motivation using rewards versus punishment, I've done it both ways. Professionally, most of the things I've tried to do well, I guess I haven't tried to do, but professionally, things that have happened have mostly been rewards as motivation. And sometimes that has come from me in the form of raises or bonuses. Sometimes it's come from some of the upper management that's even over my head in my corporation who then has made decisions regarding, once again, bonuses and raises. And the thing I've seen with using rewards for motivation is that I don't find that people are terribly motivated by them. I think what you find is that there are some people who kind of have this pie in the sky idea that they would like a raise or they would like a bonus. And once they finally get it, I think what they find is that they're just not satisfied with it. They don't like the delivery of it. They don't like the amount of it. They don't like the timing of it. And because of that, I've found that using one reward at one instance over the course of the year is not particularly motivating for the rest of the year. It might be motivating for that time, but not particularly for the job as a whole. When I think of punishment as a motivator, I've really been careful about how I use that. I've only really had to use that a couple different times. And at some stage, if people are not inherently motivated, I haven't found that to be terribly motivating either. I had one individual where I had to put him on a performance improvement plan. And I think mostly it had to do with he was young. There was a little bit of a cultural difference. He was a Jamaican, and I think by nature he's used to kind of working at a little slower pace, and I needed him to pick it up. Once we had an opportunity to sit down and discuss this, it's never been a problem since then. When you talk about using nonverbal communication, I did my entire presentation on that, so I don't want to get too far into it if you guys have already seen it. Mostly that's one of those things I really try to use to my advantage. I am cognizant of it. I try to avoid over analyzing nonverbals, and I try to keep things within context. When you talk about intercultural communication, one of the things that comes up pretty frequently in my field as we deal with patients from all walks of life in all areas at all times. And we really have to be conscious as healthcare providers to provide the best service we can and make sure we're on the same page with patients. And that means that we have to be very conscious of intercultural communication. Working in groups, I've had the opportunity to work in large groups. I've had the opportunity to work in small groups. What I've found really is that the current group I'm with, just the four of us in our office, works particularly well together. As groups have gotten larger, sometimes I find that those are less effective, at least in my experience. But handling conflict is something that currently is pretty easy for me. Once again, I work in a small office with just 4 people, and we can use conflict positively. When things come up, we can discuss it as a group. We can all do it in one room. We can all be on the same page, and that really allows us to use it as a positive, not a negative. It's pretty unusual for us to have any sort of real rift between people or a conflict that can't be resolved. So when I think about the blog as a whole and all these things that we've been discussing about regarding how you like to be managed and how you manage people, or how I do for that matter, the conclusion that I've come up with, and something that I saw that was very consistent amongst my blog entries, was that I felt that it all comes back to myself. It comes back to myself choosing a point of view that is objective, trying to be kind to people, be cognizant of how I treat others, try to lead in such a way that I don't ask people to do things that I wouldn't do myself, try to behave professionally, try to handle my patient care professionally. And those are the things that I think are going to make me a better manager or a better leader down the road. If I remember the way I'm behaving first and the way my style is first, I think that I can control some other aspects of what could be perceived negatively. And what I mean by that is that yelling at an employee is not going to help at any time, particularly if it's done in an emotional outburst. If I can rein that in, and if I can hold that to myself and then discuss further with employees as things need to be handled, I think that'll make me a much better manager. I think having compassion for others, I think caring about others, and I think really trying to understand and listen and do the best I can is the key for me growing as a manager and ultimately as a leader. Thank you.